arriving for the gala dinner. And earlier we had the IMF chief, Christine Lagarde, and she had arrived for the dinner as well.
Yeah, we are expecting all the leaders of the ASEAN nations to be taking part in the dinner this evening. Also, the key partners that are also in town here in Singapore for the East Asia Summit are expected to be in attendance for this dinner as well, as taking place at the Suntec Convention Center. It's been non-stop of meetings since the ASEAN Summit, the 33rd ASEAN Summit, began yesterday, and it continues on into the evening here, along with our coverage on Channel News Asia, as we await the arrival of the delegates for the dinner. And we can just see another car pulling up. We'll just pause for a while and wait and see who pops out of this vehicle, making their way into the convention center for the gala dinner. As Glenda mentioned just a moment ago, we have already seen the arrival of the International Monetary Fund Managing Director, Christine Lagarde. She has already arrived. Now we see some other members of the delegation arriving as well. Now this is perhaps a bit more of an informal dinner gathering. The spouses of the heads of nations will also be in attendance this evening.
So we have the ASEAN 10 member nations. Just to recap, we have Brunei, Sultan Hassan Al Bolkiah. He's in town together with Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen, as well as Indonesian President Joko Widodo.
Laos as well in attendance. Prime Minister Thongloun Sisoulith will be looking out for him. We do think that the two ladies going up the escalator just a moment ago, one of them is Indonesian President Joko Widodo's spouse. We are awaiting Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad as well, the Malaysian Prime Minister. He has been quite vocal here in Singapore about his remarks about Myanmar, which we've been covering here on Channel News Asia. We're just taking a look now to see who is arriving. It looks like it could be Cambodia, judging by the flag on the front of the car, in which case it could either be Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen or perhaps his spouse. Each nation visiting here in Singapore is coming with quite a large delegation, but as we can see there, that is Prime Minister Hun Sen of Cambodia making his way. And we rejoin pictures now with Christine Lagarde, the IMF chief, shaking hands with Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong,
together with his wife, Madam Ho Ching.
As is customary at these ASEAN summits, there's always enough time to take a photo at all of these events and ceremonies that have been taking place since yesterday.
Prime Minister of Laos. Hello.
And now we have Laos Prime Minister Thongloun Sisoulith and his wife, Prime Minister Lee and Madam Ho Ching, welcoming the ASEAN member state from Laos.
I didn't come back hotel.
Okay, I'm ready. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. See you. Prime Minister, sir, His Excellency Prime Minister.
As you can see, the sheer number of people part of the delegations that are attending the ceremony flashing across your screen. And that looks to be Thailand's Prime Minister, Prayut Chan-o-cha, and his wife as well. Very familiar with the drills of taking photos, as you can see.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. See you.
And there is a familiar face as well of one of the international leaders that is taking part in the talks. That is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau from Canada. Leaders from the group of seven, which the chairman is Canada, as well as the incoming chairman for APEC, Chile, also in attendance. You might get a glimpse of him a bit later, but For the moment, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has arrived. The Singapore Convention Centre is a rather large venue. So as you noticed, going up the escalator earlier and then making their way to shake hands with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, it does take a bit of time to get through security as well as to sort of navigate the long corridors at the Singapore Convention Centre.
And just for our international viewers, the Suntec Convention Centre is located in the city south of the country, and it has relatively, wonderful. How would I say? What am I looking for now? The wonderful sightseeing, actually. It's a beautiful landscape there of Suntec Convention Centre from a top view.
Yes, not far from the Singapore Flyer and Marina Bay.
As well as the iconic Merlion there.
Yeah, that's right. It is a rather touristy part of Singapore as well, but home for this week for the 33rd ASEAN Summit and all the other related summits that are taking place here in Singapore, the East Asia Summits, as well as numerous bilateral meetings that have been taking place between all the nations, the ASEAN nations, as well as their key partners that are in town for meetings, as well as the East Asia Summit, like I mentioned. Australia is here, Japan, South Korea, the United States, represented by Vice President Mike Pence, also here in Singapore. New Zealand's Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister, she's also visiting.
Welcome.
And now we have Prime Minister Lee greeting Cambodia's Prime Minister, Mr. Hun Sen.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Please come.
Keeping with the theme of Singapore's city in a garden, you can see pictures there of all sorts of orchids and flowers lining the sort of the walkway as the delegates make their way in. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau from Canada.
Excellency, this way for camera.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you.
Please come in first.
Once again, tonight's gala dinner is hosted by Singapore's Prime Minister, and it's for the ASEAN leaders as well as the East Asia Summit leaders and other leaders and guests of Singapore that are in attendance for the ASEAN Summit.
We just see another car pulling up with a South Korean flag on the front of the vehicle, meaning that it should be President Moon Jae-in, along with his delegation. This gala dinner will present an opportunity in a more informal setting for these world leaders to chat and discuss about a whole raft of things to talk about. As you can imagine, South Korea are here. They will be discussing sort of regional security issues with ASEAN and Japan as well.
But also the dinner, Steve, offers them an opportunity because their spouses are with them. I doubt it will be such a serious dinner. In fact, it'll be an opportunity for them to, let their hair down a little bit as well, to enjoy each other's company as well, and to perhaps maybe, just for tonight, put aside politics just for a little bit and have, a lovely dinner. Because after all, the meetings do continue tomorrow as well.
Yeah, they certainly do. And they've certainly had a day of meetings today as well as yesterday, which we've been covering here on Channel News Asia. We know that part of the menu for tonight that they will be indulging in some local Singapore-inspired delicacies, laksa, kueh pai tea as well. I understand Glenda is on the menu, so they'll certainly get to experience some of the local flavors of Singapore while they're here on the Republic.
Exactly. Now, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said earlier that, South Korea has been a strong supporter for ASEAN-led projects, but he also said that, there is room for cooperation in the region. He was speaking at the 20th ASEAN ROK Summit. Now, we know that South Korea is ASEAN's fifth largest trading partner and the fifth largest source of foreign direct investment. And Singapore's Prime Minister said, both sides, they're aiming to reach a trade volume of, now this is a very nice figure, $200 billion by the year 2020. And what else was interesting about today's meeting was that South Korean President Moon Jae-in, he outlined his southward policy to strengthen relations with ASEAN. And he said that, he looks forward to next year because South Korea and ASEAN, they celebrate 30 years of dialogue between the two sides. And also at the summit, the leaders, they discussed regional security issues. And Mr. Lee said that, Singapore welcomes the positive developments this year towards the denuclearization of the Korean peninsula.
And we just saw another vehicle come by. We didn't stop, though. We'll have to wait and see who is the next dignitary to arrive at the Suntec Convention Centre in downtown Singapore. And here is President Moon Jae-in arriving with his spouse to be greeted by Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong.
Yes, and South Korea and ASEAN will celebrate 30 years of dialogue between both sides next year. And the ASEAN chair goes to Thailand next year. So we will see lots of celebrations in Thailand. We'll be preparing for that as well.
Yes, I'm sure that will be one of the things that gets mentioned during the gala dinner this evening as well, not just looking at the progress that has been made so far this year in 2018 with Singapore as the chair, but with the looking ahead to the year ahead as well with Thailand as the chair. Now we're just looking at pictures there. You can see the very familiar and recognizable face of Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, Malaysia's Prime Minister. All smiles, tender age of 93, making his way down. Lots of people to greet him and shake hands.
Exactly, and he himself had a very eventful year this year after winning the elections and bringing him back into a leadership position. But while he was in Singapore yesterday, he was conferred the honorary title from the National University of Singapore, where he went to school as well. This was, we would say, perhaps many moons ago.
There's quite a bit of deja vu, I would imagine, for Dr. Mahathir. Coming to Singapore, being the Prime Minister of Malaysia, this is his second time round at the job. So they're all very familiar faces to him. That he would be very familiar with many of the world leaders that he's meeting with this time round. Some new faces to him perhaps, but certainly a seasoned person on the world stage when it comes to these sorts of meetings and summits. And you can see he also has a rather large delegation with him as well from Malaysia here in Singapore. As he makes his way up the escalator to be greeted by Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien-loong. A few waves.
And not to be outdone as well, Dr. Mahathir's wife, Dr. Siti Hasma, she also received the NUS Distinguished Alumni Service Award as a pioneer and role model for women doctors in Malaysia. So very strong ties there between Malaysia and Singapore, with the Malaysian leader and his wife, both, the alma mater being National University of Singapore.
Yes, certainly is very familiar with Singapore. One of the things he did say while he was here over the last few days is that ASEAN countries cannot afford to adopt protectionist measures. He said it's not time for ASEAN to do that. It needs to be open to trade, was his message. And we'll take a look at who will be coming out of this vehicle. As security makes sure that everything is in place. And it is India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi, in his familiar national dress. Prime Minister Modi was speaking at the FinTech festival earlier, and very much emphasizing how technology and digitalization will be key components going forward for all nations to be mindful of.
Yes, and he said that he advocated the use of FinTech to, as we mentioned there, combat financial crimes, cyber threats, and to help communities that have been marginalized.
Hello. Hello. Nice to see you.
Excellency, this way.
Oh,
And here we have the Chilean President, Sebastian Pinera, and he is the incoming APEC chairman.
Yes, it's not just the ASEAN Summit that's taking place in the East Asian Summit, but also later this month, the APEC meetings will be taking place, or later this week, the APEC meetings will be taking place in Papua New Guinea. So as the incoming chair and host for APEC, Chile President Sebastian Pinera is also here. So we have seen quite a few of the leaders arriving both from the ASEAN region as well as from around the world. We've had Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. We've just seen Narendra Modi from the Indian Prime Minister arriving as well. And now as we look closely at our screens, we can see Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, the State Councillor for Myanmar, arriving at the Suntec Convention Centre. And here is Prime Minister of Malaysia, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, making his way down to shake a very familiar hand of Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Ho Ching as well.
Hi, Mr. Gasman. Good evening. How are you? Come over, take a shot.
Ladies and gentlemen, the gala dinner will commence shortly.
See you later.
When the photo's done, they'll move off into the gala dinner, the room for the gala dinner, as we wait and see who will be next walking through the door here at the Suntec Convention Centre.
Prime Minister, sir, His Excellency President
And it is
of the Republic of
Indonesia's
Indonesia.
Prime Minister, Joko Widodo, accompanied by his wife.
Hi, President Jokowi. Evening. Not so bad.
You look fresh.
You can see a few light-hearted words shared. Bit of laughter between the two leaders, very familiar with each other, of course.
Excellencies, this way the camera. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please come in.
Prime Minister, sir, the Right Honourable Prime Minister of New Zealand.
And that is New Zealand's Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern arriving for the gala dinner as well. Yeah.
Now, earlier this morning as well, Ms. Jacinda Ardern had an interview here at our studios, Channel News Asia, and she spoke about the concerns of the nation and how we should be worried and that we should protect the environment and the threats, that's facing the environment today as well.
Coming from the Vice President, turn the camera. Sir, can you?
Hi, Vice President.
The Honourable Vice President of the United States of America.
Welcome.
And U.S. Vice President there, Mike Pence, together with his wife Karen. And we know they arrived last night. And they will be here to attend the East Asia Summit. And he had just arrived as well from Tokyo, where he flew in from Tokyo and his visit here.
If you look at the cameras towards your front.
Yes, Vice President Mike Pence is representing President Donald Trump, who did not make the trip over for this sort of Asian sequence of meetings, if you like. As Glenda mentioned, Vice President Pence was in Japan, and he will continue on from Singapore to Papua New Guinea for the APEC meetings. And here is India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Prime Minister of the Republic of India.
Hi, Prime Minister. See you again.
See you. Excellencies, photograph here. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellencies.
See you later.
Once again, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi was speaking to the FinTech festival. Once again, he advocated the use of FinTech to combat financial crime, cyber threats, and to help communities that have been marginalized.
Yeah, Prime Minister Modi was actually the first head of government to deliver a keynote speech at the Singapore FinTech Festival. And in his speech, Prime Minister Modi highlighted how India has become the best destination for startups, very much pushing the case for collaboration with India on that front. And here we see Aung San Suu Kyi, State Councillor for Myanmar. Aung San Suu Kyi also gave a keynote speech at the Business and Investment Summit, one of the first summits that opened here in Singapore, was very much pushing the case for Myanmar being the final frontier in terms of opportunities for investment. Very much a rallying cry for investors to come to Myanmar in all sorts of sectors. Education was one, agriculture was another that she was hoping to push as well, as she saw agriculture being a key industry for Myanmar, as Myanmar is a very sort of a productive country when it comes to agricultural produce, especially when it comes to rice and the rest of the region. And she also met earlier with Vice President of America, Mike Pence.
They held private talks actually on the ongoing ASEAN Summit, and we know that Ms. Aung San Suu Kyi very much under the spotlight at this summit for the Rohingya situation that is currently happening in Myanmar, where about 700 Rohingyas have fled the country since last year.
That is a topic very much on the minds of the international community looking in. In fact, Aung San Suu Kyi has faced criticism, not just from the US,
from the international community,
but even specifically from the ASEAN community as well. Malaysia's Prime Minister, Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, was also quite critical just yesterday, saying it was an inexcusable act.
And now Prime Minister Lee is welcoming Vietnam Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc here together with his wife, and that's Madam Ho Ching as well, greeting the Vietnam Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please come in.
Thank you.
Close the door.
Really? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, just coming back to Dr. Mahathir and his words regarding Myanmar and the Rohingya Rakhine issue. Just to read you a quote, he said, "Someone who had been detained before should know the sufferings and should not inflict it on the hapless." He was referring to Aung San Suu Kyi. And he also said that she seemed to be trying to defend the indefensible. So very much a sensitive topic here at ASEAN, though it's not been sort of so much a feature as part of the business and investment aspects of the 33rd ASEAN Summit, but it's certainly on the minds of world leaders here, as it has been since the 700,000 Rohingya in Rakhine State were sort of forced out from their homes and have fled to Bangladesh. But that is not a topic perhaps that's going to be discussed here at the gala dinner.
Mrs. Aki Abe, please.
Hi, Mrs. Abe. Welcome. Good to see you. Come.
Well, leaders from all ASEAN nations, they actually had a very, very busy day today. Things were certainly in full swing at the 33rd ASEAN Summit.
Now, we think the lady that we just saw being introduced to Lee Hsien Loong may have been Akie Abe, wife of Prime Minister of Japan, Shinzo Abe. As we await to see more guests arriving for the gala dinner, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was present and very much a part of the Japan summit that took place earlier today. And we'll wait to see if we'll see him arriving as well.
So once again, we are awaiting the arrival of distinguished guests and leaders from ASEAN as well as international countries making their way to the FinTech Convention Center located in the heart of Singapore's south, where they will be attending the gala dinner of the 33rd ASEAN Summit being hosted by Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong.
Now, this dinner does present sort of a last informal chance for these leaders to get together and have a bit of a chat before the summit wraps up tomorrow, which will be bringing you live throughout the day here on Channel News Asia. So we just see another van pulling up, looks like a security detail, no flag on the front. So we'll wait to see who these delegates are here with. Just to remind you, we've already seen the arrival of Cambodia's Prime Minister Hun Sen. We've seen Indonesia's President Joko Widodo. Myanmar's State Councillor Aung San Suu Kyi has already arrived. Malaysia's Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad, we have seen him, as well as Thailand's Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha. And we've seen Vietnam's Prime Minister Nguyen Xuan Phuc.
And from the East Asia Summit, we've also seen South Korea's President Moon Jae-in arriving together as well as New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. And currently now we are seeing, and that is Brunei Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah, and he is also in town for the ASEAN Summit, part of the 10 regional member bloc.
Brunei is the smallest member of ASEAN, a population of just 420,000.
Not to be outdone, but it's also one of the richest in ASEAN.
That's right. It does have the second largest GDP, just behind Singapore, I understand. So, size is not everything, as they say, as he makes his way up to shake hands with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. Brunei is, incidentally, one of the claimants in the South China Sea sort of ongoing disputes there, along with Vietnam, the Philippines. Brunei also has a claim in those seas, in the South China Sea, a dispute ongoing with China. One of the things that has been, or progress has been made, is the Code of Conduct, Glenda, with regards to the South China Sea. A framework seems to have been agreed. So progress certainly been made on how these nations can manage the disputes that they have in the South China Sea.
Yes, indeed. Progress has been made. Every year we see the ASEAN Summit growing from strength to strength, with the 10 regional countries all coming together to talk about the issues and how to take things forward as well, as a grouping, as a 10-member grouping. So it's very heartening to see ASEAN grow, year after year as a economic bloc. And this year, it's... And there we have again for our home viewers, Brunei's Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah making his way up to attend the gala dinner, the 33rd ASEAN Gala dinner being hosted by Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. And everyone's now at the FinTech Convention Center, which is located in the heart of Singapore, actually the heart in south, the city center south of Singapore.
Now, if my history serves me correctly, Glenda, Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah ascended the throne at the tender age of 21. He has been head of state for Brunei. He celebrated his 50th Golden Jubilee last year. And so he has been 51 years as the ruler of Brunei. So he has seen the region, Southeast Asia, for many years. And, of course, ASEAN since its formation as well. Brunei has been a part of it since it became independent in 1984. And so he's also very familiar with all the heads of state. The
workings, the ins and outs
of ASEAN.
Exactly, very matured and very experienced leader as well.
Yes, and here he is shaking hands with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Ho Chi.
Your Majesty, if you look here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Majesty.
Please come in first.
So from the leaders from ASEAN, the 10 leaders that we're expecting to see at the gala dinner this evening, we are just awaiting then the arrival of the Philippines President, Glenda, Rodrigo Duterte. He has not been spotted so far by our camera crews, but we are waiting his arrival as well.
And from the East Asia Summit, I guess we are still waiting arrival of China's Premier Li Keqiang. and Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, as well as Russian President Vladimir Putin.
And we will as well be perhaps waiting for Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison. Just to recap, this gala dinner for the 33rd ASEAN Summit and the related summits we are awaiting the arrival of all the guests. We have seen many of the leaders of the ASEAN countries arrive already. They have spent the last 2 days locked in various summits discussing a whole range of topics from security to trade to the dispute resolution when it comes to the South China Sea. All sorts of manner of discussions have been taking place here in Singapore. As Singapore is the ASEAN chair for this year, we know that this will be the last event hosted by Singapore for this year for the ASEAN grouping before it hands over the reins to Thailand next year, which will be represented this year by Prime Minister Prayut Chan-o-cha, who has arrived already for the gala dinner. And just to recap some of the events that have been taking place today here in Singapore, ASEAN and China had a summit where they discussed their mutual economies and the need to stay connected to build on positive momentum. Those were some of the words used by Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong this morning, along with the economies of Southeast Asia and China, saying that there is a need to stay open and connected to one another to sustain the existing economic dynamism. And those are words used by Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong earlier today when he was speaking at the ASEAN-China Summit. He also gave suggestions on how to build upon the current positive momentum in relations between the ruling grouping and China. And he said Singapore was the immediate past coordinator for dialogue relations between the two parties. And we know that Singapore and China have had a very good working relationship in recent years. And he mentioned that one way that further progress can be made, he made reference to fully implementing the ASEAN-China Free Trade Area Upgrade Protocol. It's a very long name indeed, but that is expected to give businesses easier access to the China market. And if you're from a small Southeast Asian country, having access to the second largest economy in the world, you could certainly see the appeal of that sort of collaboration going forward.
Steve, I managed to get my hands on what's going to be happening at the gala dinner, and so this is what's going to be happening at the 33rd ASEAN Summit Gala dinner. So after a long day of meeting, they're all going to be sitting down, and here are some of the dishes that will be offered tonight, and this is what they're going to be eating for you, home viewers. It is about dinner time right now, so let's take a look at what they're going to be having for the appetizer. It is yusheng. They're going to have scallops, salmon, pomelo, mango, vegetables, and then for their soup, it's going to be laksa. Laksa is a local Singapore dish. It's a little bit spicy, and I'm reading the menu. It says it is deconstructed laksa rice noodles with prawn ravioli laced with laksa leaves. And here we have the Australian Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, there being greeted by Minister Lee Hsien Loong, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Madam Hon Ching.
Yeah, good opportunity for the Prime Minister of Australia to try some local laksa.
So let's see. And then, so after the soup, the main course, this is quite interesting. The main course is called Surf and Turf. They're going to have slow-cooked grain-fed Angus beef.
You're almost putting us in the room with them, Glenda, with this description of food. Plenty for them to sink their teeth into, which is something they've also been doing throughout the meetings here. Coming back to the China-ASEAN Summit that took place earlier today. During the opening remarks, China Premier Li Keqiang, who we are awaiting the arrival of as well, he is one of the last few that we are waiting for. He also spoke about the upgrade protocol, talking about the free trade agreement, saying that they wanted to upgrade it rather than start with anything new. He also said he wanted to work towards the full liberalization of the ASEAN-China air transport agreement. And that was to mobilize private capital using financial institutions such as the ASEAN Infrastructure Investment Bank and the Asian Development Bank as well. And to close ASEAN's infrastructure financing gap would also help. That was something that Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong also said. So they're talking about the One Belt, One Road would fall into that as well as part of China's initiatives around the world, but also, paying very close attention to ASEAN countries right on our doorstep here in Southeast Asia.
Right, Steve, and you also mentioned there about China. So ASEAN countries and China, Mr. Li Keqiang today mentioned that, he's hoping to complete talks on this code of conduct for the South China Sea, and they're hoping to do it in 3 years, even though he says negotiations are proving to be tough and complicated.
Well, speaking of Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, here he is arriving now to shake hands with Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Ho Ching as well. Now, worth noting that China has been ASEAN's top trading partner for 8 consecutive years. So a lot of collaboration going on between ASEAN and China. In fact, in 2017, ASEAN's merchandise trade with China reached $442 billion, which is a significant amount of money. And you can only think that given the way the talks are going and so much positivity being spoken of, some of which I'm sure we will be hearing from Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong as well during the gala dinner, you can only think that relationship is just going to go from strength to strength.
Exactly.
And that those dollar signs, when it comes to trade, are just going to be going up and up.
Right. And we understand that the gala dinner, the 33rd ASEAN Gala dinner, will be commencing shortly. It seems that all the leaders have since arrived at the Suntec Convention Center.
And we didn't see Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte, so we'll have to see if he slipped past the cameras and made it into the room without us.
Or perhaps he was already there earlier.
Perhaps we'll have to wait and see on that.
What was also discussed today as well was the negotiations on the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, RCEP, that would be concluded by next year. That are very, very hopeful. We managed to actually have a quick chat as well with Chan Chun Sing, and he said that, they're just like two outstanding issues now remain for the negotiation of RCEP. One is the first one he mentioned was market access, and he said that these are regarding the tariff values that need to be bilaterally negotiated, and most of the ASEAN countries have already negotiated this. Just a few key countries just outstanding on that. The second set would also be the rules and regulations that have been concluded. He mentioned that's very heartening to know that 7 chapters of these rules and regulations have already been concluded. 5 done this by Monday. I think they arrived. So 5 chapters on Monday have been concluded. But, some outstanding issues, and some of these countries, they're still waiting to see the entire package before, these outstanding issues will be concluded. He said that he's very cautiously optimistic about the conclusion, but he's very positive that it will be signed by next year, and that, we will wait for Thailand's chairmanship to see RCEP come into its being.
Yeah, that's right. That might determine sort of the timing of when those things were announced. The Minister for Trade and Industry, Chan Chun Sing, was making all these comments earlier as he stepped out of the second Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership Summit. That's the RCEP summit that happened, a few hours ago here in Singapore. And as Glenda mentioned, various chapters have been concluded. A lot of the negotiations have sort of taken place, and they're all moving in the direction that Minister Chan Chun Sing was very comfortable with and very sort of positive about as well. Market access negotiations, he was saying they're advanced, and they're talking about the sustainability issues with regards to those as well.
Right.
And you can sort of see pictures here. I think we're just seeing the Foreign Minister, Vivian Balakrishnan.
Singapore's Foreign Minister. We mentioned that a lot happened today at the ASEAN Summit, together with the East Asia Summit, as well as the other leaders. And so, we're wondering, Canada, Justin Trudeau. So Singapore and Canada today signed a 2-year memorandum of understanding on cybersecurity cooperation. And It was so Prime Minister Lee and Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, they witnessed the signing between Mr. David Koh, who is Chief Executive of Singapore's Cybersecurity Agency, together with the High Commissioner of Canada, Ms. Lynn McDonald. So now this memorandum will cover cybersecurity cooperation in key areas, and this will be in information exchange, sharing on cyber threats as well as cyber attacks, sharing of best practices, lots of bilateral agreements and communication and exchanges here. So it's very heartening to see that a lot has been happening in the past just 2 days.
Yeah, and cybersecurity is something that has been a very sort of hot button issue, if you like, something talked about, not just here in Singapore, although Singapore has had its issues of cybersecurity in recent months. The Sing Health scandal breach comes to mind, and that's something that has been sort of talked about, and there's an ongoing inquiry into that as well, which we'll be giving you more information on. I think today it's wrapping up its inquiry on that Sing Health breach, which we'll have more on Singapore Tonight a bit later this evening. But as you can see, pictures of the delegates in the hall at the Suntec City for the Gala dinner. They're all just awaiting to see what will be happening. In the centre of your screen with the red tie, that is Lim Jok Hoi. He is the ASEAN Secretariat. Been in the post since last year. It's been a very busy time for him, I would imagine, being the ASEAN Secretariat based out of Jakarta. And all these delegates have been taking part in all sorts of meetings over the last 2 days here in Singapore. And this gala dinner brings them all together from the ASEAN summits as well as the East Asia summits. We've seen it's not just the ASEAN leaders, but international leaders as well. We've seen Christine Lagarde, she's in the room as well, the IMF chief as well. She was speaking earlier today. It's been a very busy time here in Singapore, Glenda. So hopefully this evening they'll all have a chance to sort of, I don't say let their hair down a bit, but they are all dignitaries, but have a chance to sort of talk in a less formal fashion, as you can see. Foreign Affairs Minister Vivian Balakrishnan and his wife. Yeah, now this is the 33rd ASEAN Summit taking place in Singapore. We're looking at images live from the ballroom or the gala dinner for this summit taking place. Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong is expected to make a short address. He won't be speaking for too long, so we understand. There are also some performances to get through that they will be able to enjoy. And of course, as Glenda was discussing earlier, some of the local cuisine, which I'm sure they're all eager to try out.
They'll be having a taste of some yusheng. They'll be having some local laksa, surf and turf. They're gonna, and for dessert, this is quite interesting. They're gonna have a kaya, toast, and kopi. And kopi is a slang for coffee, actually. So it's and for those of you at home, kaya is a smooth egg and coconut dessert.
I suppose coffee would be something they might all be very familiar with, given the long meetings that they've had to endure. All right, and we understand that our very own Dawn Tan is down there as well. She's been covering events for the last few days. We'll be crossing to her shortly to get her take on events that have been happening. In fact, I can see her right now on the screen right next to me. How could I miss that? Dawn, tell us a bit more about what's going on where you are. I can see you're in the media centre, aren't you?
That's right. Hi, Glenda. Hi, Steve. I'm here at the International Media Centre, and we've been watching exactly the same pictures that you've been watching as all of these dignitaries, these world leaders, have been converging on the Suntec City Centre to meet with Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Ho Ching. They greeted them there at the entrance of this building, all now seated inside that hall, ready to have dinner together. Now, it's very easy to imagine when you see those warm embraces and the smiles that we all saw together, that these people know each other very well, that they spend a lot of time with each other, but in fact they do not. They do not often see each other, and in some cases, over the course of the past 2 days, some of these world leaders, they've met for the first time, particularly the ASEAN leaders with some of their non-ASEAN counterparts. Scott Morrison, for example, being introduced at an informal breakfast this morning as Prime Minister of Australia. That was the first time that many ASEAN leaders would have met him. Meeting the neighbours, as it were, was something that he had to do, and at the end of it he said it was a positive morning, he had a great time. The thing about all of these meetings, Glenda, Steve, is that as part of the ASEAN public, we have to ask ourselves, what is it all about? What does it mean to you and me? Well, it means the signing of a lot of agreements, potentially, that ensure jobs, quality of life, security, ensure our security as well, and maybe give hope to some of the millions of SMEs from across ASEAN that they'll get more opportunities to engage and interact with markets that they've never even dreamed of doing business with before. It's something that Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has spoken about. Trade Minister Chan Chun Sing, he has also echoed this. We have to go abroad in order to grow, in order to survive in this rapidly changing environment. That message too echoed so frequently across the Singapore FinTech Festival that's also been taking place concurrently with the ASEAN 2018 Summit, that this pace of digital revolution, it is going to swallow us if we don't take steps to not just stay ahead of the curve, but to rise way above it. And so the proceedings for the past few days, they will culminate tomorrow when the closing ceremony happens. And I think that perhaps you might be having, I just hear some announcements. I wonder whether I'm going to have to throw back to you in the studio.
Yeah, Dawn, we are just seeing some dignitaries walking down the red carpet, it looks like, for the gala dinner. We might come back and check in with you in just a bit. Let's just clarify, though, what we can see here from the newsroom. We can see Lee Keqiang walking down the red carpet. He's flanked by Brunei's Sultan Hassanal Bolkiah as well. It looks like all the dignitaries from the ASEAN Summit, as well as the East Asia Summit, all the main leaders taking place here in Singapore, are all making their way down to their respective seats. And you can see Jacinda Ardern, New Zealand's Prime Minister, as well. Yes, it looks like they're all finally getting themselves into position. Aung San Suu Kyi, Myanmar's councillor, and Christine Lagarde, the IMF head, as well, walking side by side, sharing a few words. There's Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau. Now, earlier, Singapore and Canada agreed to boost cybersecurity cooperation. So that's one area in which the two nations taking part in the summit this year have signed, in fact, a 2-year memorandum of understanding on cybersecurity cooperation, agreeing to share and exchange information to counter threats.
So ASEAN, the 33rd ASEAN Summit, ASEAN as a grouping as well needs to continue to grow from strength to strength. And now walking in, you can see U.S. Vice President Mike Pence together with his wife Karen. U.S. Vice President VP Mike Pence standing in for Donald Trump, and he will also be attending the East Asia Summit. And
he's walking in alongside with Scott Morrison, the new Australian Prime Minister. And there is India's Prime Minister, Narendra Modi.
And together with South Korea's Moon Jae-in, and we also see Malaysia's Prime Minister Dr. Mahathir Mohamad there.
Yes, flanked by
the security
detail and delegates as well. Interesting to know how many people this ballroom can accommodate, because it looks incredibly large to house so many people. And that was Siti Hasma Muhammad Ali, Dr. Mahathir's wife, just walking through the screen in the red and black.
Thank you. Please be seated.
So you can see Moon Jae-in reaching across the table to shake hands with some familiar faces, as the MC looks like she wants to get this event underway. Always a tricky task when there are so many people in the room.
Well, it's a tricky task with so many people in the room, especially, having 10 regional member bloc leaders all in one room and, trying to get to speak and say hello to everybody. It's quite a task in itself. And at the bottom left corner, you can see Myanmar's leader Aung San Suu Kyi.
To the gala dinner of the 33rd ASEAN Summit and related summits. We are glad that you could be with us here this evening and hope that you will enjoy yourselves. My name's Jeremy Rotnam.
And my name's Kimberly Tan. We're from the radio station Power 98.
And we are honored to be your hosts for this special occasion.
Now, to begin our program, may we please invite Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong to deliver the opening address. Prime Minister, please.
Your Majesty, Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the gala dinner. I hope you are looking forward to tonight's dinner as much as I am. We've had a long day. In fact, it's been quite a long year. We've been busy with a series of meetings and dialogues during this last 12 months to map out and launch significant deliverables that will strengthen our ASEAN community and tangibly benefit our peoples. Looking at the list of items, some of which I mentioned at my speech at the opening ceremony yesterday, I think we have once again outdone ourselves. And this would not have been possible without the collective commitment and the efforts of our ASEAN colleagues and partners. Therefore, tonight we deserve to let our hair down just a little and to celebrate. To celebrate the fruits of our labor, to celebrate our strong and enduring friendship, to celebrate how far ASEAN has come and our future ahead. Tonight is a gathering of family members and close friends. Amongst the ASEAN leaders, we've met one another at various ASEAN-related summits and events no less than 6 times this year. Our officials must have lost count of the number of meetings they've held. Through the course of these meetings, we've become familiar with one another, and we have built an ASEAN spirit that's especially palpable when we see each other at international fora. We've also forged lasting friendships and memories with our external partners, and I'm glad to have all of you here with us this evening. I hope that each one of us will bring back something memorable after this year's chairmanship. Be it the sense of satisfaction, knowing that the deliverables we launch will improve our people's lives, or the joy you see on the faces of our youths when they participate in Hyperplay, our first ever ASEAN eSports and music festival. The marvelous showcase of our rich and diverse cultures has enriched our heritage. Or perhaps you'll miss Singapore food after all the meetings which you've had here. Therefore, tonight we are serving you Singapore-inspired cuisine like yu sheng, laksa, and kueh pai tee. And we've jazzed it up a little since most of you are probably already quite familiar with the local food. Regardless of what you'll remember of this year's chairmanship, I believe a common thread of our collective memories is our people. At its core, ASEAN is about our peoples. We are a family of 630 million individuals, each with a unique set of talents, skills, languages, cultural, and religious background. In ASEAN, we've embraced this diversity as our strength. Our friendships are forged based on mutual understanding and respect. And this is how ASEAN has stood the test of time as we strengthen our community and build partnerships and friendships across the world. We've laid the groundwork for a more united, resilient, and innovative ASEAN, not just for ourselves, but for future generations. And I hope we'll also pass on to the youth this spirit of camaraderie and unity that we've cultivated over the last half-century, so that they'll forge an even brighter future for ASEAN together. So once again, thank you for your support for our chairmanship, and have a wonderful evening tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
And Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, they're kicking off the 33rd ASEAN Summit Gala dinner where he said that they are celebrating the fruits of their labor, celebrating strong and enduring friendship, celebrating how far ASEAN has come and the future ahead. He also talked about forging lasting friendships and memories with external partners. And we know that we have some of the partners here with us as well. And he also mentioned that we are a family of 630 million individuals, each with a unique set of talents, skills, language, culture, and religious background.
He also mentioned that it's the diversity of the region as well that is part of its strength. ASEAN's been very busy, no less than six meetings this year. He joked a bit about how they may have lost track of all the meetings that have taken place. A lot of the delegates here have been very busy this year. So let's just recap for you what's been going on this week in Singapore, because things have certainly been in full swing today. Leaders from all the 10 ASEAN nations, plus other regional and world powers, well, they've held a slew of meetings to bolster economic as well as social ties.
Yeah, the regional grouping, they met with key dialogue partners such as China and Japan. They also sat down to discuss the specifics of an ambitious free trade pact, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP. Yes,
you should be getting very familiar with that term by now. It will be the world's largest trade deal if it rolls out, covering half the world's population. Those negotiations have dominated the summit.
And Dawn Tan, she's at the Suntec Convention Centre now. She joins us to give us some of the key highlights. Dawn.
Hi again, Glenda, Steve, you're right. This has been a phenomenal past 2 days where a series of bilateral meetings have been taking place, as well as some top-level meetings between the leaders. We don't quite know yet, apart from a few specific agreements that were reached, we don't quite know yet what the outcome of those will be. I have to point out about the RCEP agreement, even though we've talked about the fact that, we've had confirmation today that this will likely be signed next year, the fact is, hopes had been that that would happen at this summit, that we would be seeing a consensus among all of the 10 member nations as well as their counterparts to get this thing pushed through. So the press internationally and locally as well have been looking at that fact, looking at the fact that it has been stalled for another year, another 12 months of waiting. And what does that mean for ASEAN? What does it mean for the world? What does it mean for multilateralism? What Lee Hsien Loong, the Prime Minister, was saying was fraying at the edges in a way at this point in time when you see so much anti-globalization and this feeling of closing doors rather than opening them in certain parts of the world. For ASEAN, it could mean a lot, because what it could also be filled with is a lot of time with the United States and China playing games, playing up with trade tensions over those next 12 months. So there is a lot at stake. So, come 12 months' time, if they get all of those agreements, the chapters sorted out, that would be great. But it's not everybody who feels that they are entirely convinced that that is going to happen. It's going to be a case, analysts say, we're going to have to wait and see whether there's certain sticking points which are still there, to do with e-commerce, to do with investment, to do with trade practices, whether they can all get on the same page. That's been the key message that Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has had over the past few days since this summit began, which is we can do all of this together. We can do business together. We can build peace together. And build upon what the message for this year has been under Singapore's chairmanship, that of innovation, of resilience, ensuring centrality, ensuring that we stay on the same page. But can we? That's the big question that all those world leaders, while they're enjoying their meal this evening, they may have that in the back of their mind as well.
All right, thanks for that. Dawn Tan speaking to us from the 33rd ASEAN Summit here in Singapore.
Now, the 21st ASEAN-China Summit took place amid increasing uncertainty over trade and maritime security. But ASEAN and China's relationship is on a positive trajectory. That was reflected in the opening remarks of Singapore's Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang at the summit.
Well, foreign ministers, they also agreed on a draft texts that will form the basis of negotiations for a code of conduct in the South China Sea. Olivia Seong, she joins us now. Olivia, what were some of the key takeaways from Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong and Chinese Premier Li Keqiang's opening speeches today?
Well, certainly, I think what stood out was a very positive and collaborative tone that the meeting and the leaders projected during that ASEAN-China Summit. What Chinese Premier Li Keqiang said in his opening remarks was that there have been profound and complex changes in the regional and international environment, but despite that, the collaboration and cooperation between China and ASEAN has grown from strength to strength. And this is despite there being differences between ASEAN and China. And Premier Li said that what they have been able to do is to find a way to resolve and to get around those differences. One such example, of course, is the South China Sea, that territorial dispute which sees China and several ASEAN states have competing claims in. But what Premier Li said is that they are now hoping for this code of conduct that in the South China Sea, with a document that they've been talking about for a very long time, many years now. What he is saying that he's hoping to see is that the first reading of the document can be completed next year and the conclusion of the consultations completed in the next 3 years.
我们找到妥善管控和化解分歧的办法，比如在南海问题上，南海各方行为宣言10几年来维护了南海的总体平稳和平，南海局势趋稳。我们在今年又各方形成了关于南海行为准则的单一磋商文本，并且一致同意。
Well, on his part, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said that he was encouraged by the good progress that negotiations have made on that code of conduct since it began earlier this year. But he did say that a lot of challenges in the negotiations there'll be a lot of challenging negotiations taking place going forward. In the meantime, though, what Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said, he called on all parties to exercise restraint so that they will be able to maintain this environment of peace and stability in which the negotiations on the code of conduct can take place. Now, Prime Minister Lee also made another call to ASEAN and China, and that is to continue to demonstrate strong commitment to multilateral trade. Of course, this coming amid a backdrop of that trade war that we are seeing between China and the United States. This, of course, has rattled the global economy, and there's a lot of concern about how this will play out. But PM Lee said that China and ASEAN have both benefited from free trade, and to continue this momentum, what they have to do is to continue to be open to each other. And one way that is going to take place is through the upgraded China-ASEAN Free Trade Agreement, and that is set to bring benefits to the businesses and the people in the region. And of course, Premier Lee also said that this agreement has gone through, the upgrade rather, has gone through all the domestic procedures in all the countries, and of course they are hoping that this will come into effect very soon. So let's have a listen to what PM Lee had to say.
ASEAN and China share a strong, substantial and mutually beneficial relationship. Our economic ties are robust and have grown from strength to strength. China has been ASEAN's top trading partner for 8 consecutive years.
Yeah, Ollie, Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong talking about progress that has been made between ASEAN and China. Did he talk about, or were there any sort of key outcomes coming from the ASEAN-China summit then?
Yes, there were a few key outcomes from the ASEAN-China meetings this morning. One of them is that ASEAN and China have adopted this strategic partnership vision 2030 statement, and that is essentially a guideline for the future partnership between ASEAN and China. ASEAN and China have already been through 15 years of this strategic partnership, and this vision will take it through to 2030. Now, another outcome of that, the Chinese side is saying that going forward, they're also looking into cooperation on the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as on smart cities and in e-commerce as well. China is also looking to set up a scholarship for a training program for young people to go to China. So for ASEAN young people to go to China to receive training, and this is part of a leadership program that they are putting in place. They are also looking to expand cooperation on the security front. This year, ASEAN and China held its very first joint maritime exercise in China, and this is particularly significant given the tensions that we continue to see in the South China Sea between the ASEAN states that have claims in the region along with China. So this is really showing ASEAN and China putting aside their differences and wanting to work together.
All right, many thanks for that. Olivia Xiong speaking to us about the ASEAN-China Summit that took place earlier today.
Well, Sarah Al-Khaldi, she's keeping an eye on the business news, and we could see regulated digital currency soon.
Yeah, Glenda, now that is if International Monetary Fund's Christine Lagarde has a sway, because she says there's a role for central banks to enter the world of digital currencies. That's because money created by central banks will be regulated and trustworthy, unlike private currencies. Look Wei Su has more on her calls at the Singapore FinTech Festival.
It's a bewildering world of fintech out there. Promises as hard to grasp as they are to pin down at this third edition of the Singapore FinTech Festival. But if there's one thing all tech companies have in common, it's the idea that change is in the air.
Or change driven by technologies reshaping our landscape so rapidly we can barely keep pace. And that was on the mind of the Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund, speaking on day 3 at the Singapore FinTech Festival.
Change often appears daunting, unsettling, destabilizing, disrupting. Especially true for technological change. They disrupt our habit, our emotions, our jobs, our social interaction. For better or for worse. The key is to harness the benefits while managing the risks.
And Ms. Lagarde dug deep, laying out a quick précis of the history of the evolution of money.
The fintech revolution questions the two forms of money, coins and commercial bank deposit. And it questions the role of the state in providing money. Beyond regulation, should the state remain an active player in the market for money? Should it fill the void left by the retreat of cash? Let me be more specific. Should central banks issue a new digital form of money?
According to the IMF head, there is no option but to take this very seriously. Digital currency issued and backed by a central bank has to serve both users in terms of payment and value storage needs, and central banks themselves in terms of meeting public policy goals. Requirements that lent pause to Ms. Lagarde's absolute push for a digital currency. For many in the audience, she could have gone much further.
One thing that I did not agree with Madame Lagarde on was the universal need. She said she didn't think that there was a universal need for a central bank digital currency. And I couldn't disagree with her more on that. I think there is. What could be more universal than providing free transaction services to 2 billion people in the world and including them financially? What could be more universal than eliminating credit risk between financial institutions? It is the most profound thing we could possibly do.
Those ideas that before had been completely disregarded, like should central banks issue a central bank digital currency, we are now much more open to debate. So I was very much inspired by Ms. Lagarde's speech, and I think that the first currency in the world to introduce central bank digital currency will dominate the global currency world.
So the verdict on the benefits and the costs of a central bank digital currency. Well, Ms. Lagarde herself sounded a relatively cautious note, laying out the far-reaching impacts ranging from threats to financial integrity and stability to threats to innovation. But she drew away from specifics at the end, concluding with a general comment that fundamentally the case is about change. That as technology changes, so must we.
Well, back to the ASEAN Summit now. The Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, trade deal is expected to conclude in 2019. Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong revealed this at the opening of the second RCEP summit today. He noted that talks took longer than usual to conclude, but urged RCEP members to press on as delays will put the group at risk of losing credibility. Net Lim joins us now live from the Suntec Convention Center where the talks were held. Well, Lynette, a lot of focus in the RCEP meetings right now. What are some of the key sticking points that continue to drag on the talks?
Yes, Sarah. Well, some strong words from Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong that you could just detect that little bit of frustration that there are some of the key sticking points actually don't involve the ASEAN countries so much, but the larger countries. So if you recall, RCEP actually involves the 10 ASEAN countries, the 3 Northeast Asian powerhouses of China, Korea and Japan, and Australia, New Zealand and India. Now, a lot of these issues center around the fact that it's such a diverse mega trade pact. The countries are at very different levels of economic development. For example, India is concerned and reluctant to lower tariffs. It's afraid that it could lead to cheap goods flooding into its market, while at the same time, India's chief export, which is its people, are unable to access labor markets in the RCEP countries. And this is because RCEP does not provide for labor mobility or the free movement of people across borders. So these are just some of the sticking points. Other issues include the import of generic medicines. Again, India is concerned that it could be restricted due to requirements from Korea and Japan. Another issue is Australia and Japan putting pressure on China to do more in terms of intellectual property rights protection. So a lot of these issues have yet to be fully ironed out, and we're now looking at having the talks conclude in 2019. Let's take a listen at what Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said earlier.
Substantial progress has been made this year to advance the RCEP negotiations. We concluded 5 more chapters, bringing the total number of concluded chapters to 7. We have also secured significant breakthroughs in rules-based chapters. As it stands, the RCEP agreement contains significant improvements above the existing ASEAN +1 FTAs. Market access negotiations have advanced substantially, bringing us closer to finalization next year. We are now at the final stage of negotiations. With a strong momentum generated this year, I'm pleased to note that the RCEP negotiations are poised for conclusion in 2019.
Lynette, what was said about the importance of this deal, because we are up against the backdrop of ongoing trade tensions?
Yep. Ever since the onset of the US-China trade war, there's been increasing focus on RCEP as some sort of magic pill to help lift the rest of the world amid the trade tensions and rising protectionism. A lot of the RCEP member countries, including Singapore, Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, Australia and Japan, their heads of state, their leaders, as well as their trade ministers have all voiced support for the RCEP deal and talked about its importance as a signal for multilateralism, for support, its importance in supporting and championing free trade. But despite the leaders knowing that the long-term benefits of free trade are there, knowing the long-term benefits of this mega trade pact, there are short-term immediate considerations. At least 4 of the RCEP nations, Indonesia, Thailand, Australia and India, will be going into elections next year, and there could be domestic considerations from various interest groups, industries and farmers who might provide an electoral backlash if the trade pact proves to be less beneficial than they think. And so this is something that could hold back the timely conclusion of the RCEP negotiations next year. Let's take a listen at what Singapore Trade and Industry Minister Chan Chun Sing had to say.
All the leaders expressed a very strong determination to conclude the RCEP by 2019, and that's because they can see the benefits to their respective economies and how this RCEP can be a positive message in the current global climate of unilateralism and protectionism.
That was Lynette Lim there joining us about the second RCEP summit today. Well, meanwhile, the Monetary Authority of Singapore is looking to make it easier for FinTech startups to test out their products. It's seeking public feedback for its new Sandbox Express initiative. The central bank is also setting aside 35 million Singapore dollars to help smaller banks and insurers make use of regulatory technology. Gwyneth Kyo with more.
Regulatory technology, or RegTech, is being used to address inefficiencies in the financial industry. For instance, Singapore's central bank has been working on standardizing how data from financial institutions is collected. And it's now setting aside new funds to help smaller banks make use of RegTech. MES board member and Education Minister Ong Ye Kung also announced an industry consultation on a new regulatory sandbox for FinTech firms. Sandbox Express aims to make it easier for companies to start testing their services.
The Sandbox Express. What it means is it will make it easier to get into the sandbox. 21 days, that will be our target for a new FinTech firm to get into the sandbox. And these will be for activities where the risks are low or very well understood by the market as well as the regulators, and we can relax the system and allow tests and experiment to happen more quickly.
Mr. Rong also addressed the need for individuals to have the necessary skills to drive innovation in FinTech forward.
So therefore, total training hours for adults delivery have increased drastically. 2013, 5 years ago, it was about 26 million training hours. Now it's 41 million training hours. And a large part of the increase is driven by tech training, including data analytics, cybersecurity, software development, agile software development, and many more.
However, consultancy Accenture said organizations currently use only 3% of their revenue for skills upgrading. It estimates that organizations will need to increase this ratio to 5% of revenue in the short term as a benchmark, and that collaboration across the industry is also important when it comes to upskilling the workforce.
It's now time for corporations to come together and be able to see what sort of training as well we can leverage across the industry. Having some sort of common standards across the industry will be good for trying to upskill Singapore as a whole, as opposed to each corporation trying to do it individually. I think there's a lot of common synergies across the workforce.
Mr. Govinda also said these efforts need to be driven by top management for them to be successful.
And that's your business update this hour, guys.
All right, thanks very much, Sarah, for that. And still to come, ASEAN holds talks with Japan, and all sides are looking for new areas to collaborate as the world evolves.
Every day, the financial world goes through dramatic rise and falls.
Finalization of the agreement on technical cooperation between ASEAN and Japan, which will provide us with an additional platform for cooperation.
ASEAN also held talks with Russia. Both sides agreed to enhance cooperation in areas of mutual interest, and there's also a tangible outcome. ASEAN signed a memorandum of understanding with the Eurasian Economic Union, which includes Russia. And Jeremy Ko tells us what exactly this means for both sides.
Russia became ASEAN's dialogue partner in 1996. And the last time ASEAN and Russian leaders met was in 2016 in the Russian city of Sochi to commemorate the 20th anniversary of ASEAN-Russia dialogue relations. Speaking at the third ASEAN-Russia Summit in Singapore, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong said he's pleased to note that there has been much progress in the partnership since then.
ASEAN and Russia work together in a broad range of areas, from political security issues to economic to social cultural issues. Russia also participates actively in ASEAN-led fora, like the ASEAN Regional Forum, the ASEAN Defence Ministers Meeting Plus, and the East Asia Summit. Today's summit is timely because it gives both sides the opportunity to reaffirm our commitment to further strengthen ASEAN-Russia ties.
While in Singapore, both sides signed a memorandum of understanding between ASEAN and the Eurasian Economic Union, which includes countries like Russia, Armenia, and Kazakhstan. This would promote economic cooperation and collaboration in areas like e-commerce, trade in services, and investment.
Россия уделяет большое внимание развитию отношений с ASEAN на основе взаимного уважения и учета интересов друг друга.
This is the first time that Mr. Putin is attending the East Asia Summit since his country joined in 2011. Previously, he had always sent his Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev to the meetings, and some political watchers say Mr. Putin's presence is meant to show his commitment to the Southeast Asian region. Since US President Donald Trump took office, political watchers say US interests in Southeast Asia have weakened when compared to his predecessor Barack Obama. For instance, Mr. Trump has yet to appoint an ambassador to ASEAN after nearly 2 years, and China has used the opportunity to reinforce its influence in the region. Russia also wants a piece of the pie, especially as some countries grow increasingly wary of China's expanding influence in the region, and has been trying to deepen political and economic ties with Southeast Asian countries.
The signal is very clear. Russia is more and more interested in the regional affairs, in the Asia-Pacific affairs, and Russia is more and more interested in engaging with ASEAN as a very constructive player in this region, and we wholeheartedly support the central role of ASEAN in different multilateral forums and mechanisms in this region.
While in Singapore, Mr. Putin will also hold bilateral meetings with various leaders. And of particular interest is his meeting with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Both countries are negotiating a peace treaty to formally end their World War II hostilities. But this treaty also hinges on an agreement over a territorial dispute. Jeremy Ko, Channel News Asia, Singapore.
US Vice President Mike Pence has pressed Myanmar leader Aung San Suu Kyi over the ongoing Rohingya crisis. He made the comments in a brief meeting with reporters before they held private talks at the ongoing ASEAN Summit.
I'm also very anxious to hear about the progress that's being made regarding the Rohingya. This is a tragedy that has touched the hearts of millions of Americans. The violence and persecution by military and vigilantes that resulted in driving 700,000 Rohingya to Bangladesh is without excuse.
People have different points of view, but the point is that you should exchange those views and learn to understand each other better. In a way, we can say that we understand our country better than any other country does. And I'm sure you will say the same of yours, that you understand your own country better than anybody else does.
This isn't the first time the Rohingya issue has figured in the ASEAN meetings this week. Malaysian Prime Minister Mahathir Mohamad earlier criticised Aung San Suu Kyi for her handling of the crisis.
More than 700,000 Rohingya have fled amid a military crackdown in northern Rakhine State.
Sri Lanka's political crisis deepens further after its parliament voted out the government of former strongman Mahinda Rajapaksa. He was picked to replace Ranil Wickremesinghe, who was sacked by President Maithripala Sirisena last month.
And there were chaotic scenes on the parliament floor today as lawmakers handed down their verdict. Majority of the assembly backed a no-confidence motion against Mr. Rajapaksa.
Well, but the result only creates a power vacuum since it does not automatically mean Mr. Wickremesinghe has won the constitutional showdown. In fact, the president still has power to choose the next prime minister.
The development follows the Sri Lankan Supreme Court's decision yesterday overruling the president's move to dissolve parliament. The High Court had also ground to a halt in preparations for a snap election set for January.
The US, European Union and other powers, they've raised concerns over the crisis in this strategically important island nation of 21 million people.
Also making news tonight, Calgary's hopes of hosting the 2026 Winter Olympics are in turmoil after residents voted against the city's plan to bid for the Games. More than 56% of voters said no, when both sides are expected a close call. Calgary hosted the 1988 Winter Games, but residents were not convinced that the city should and could foot the chunk of the $295 million bill for hosting the event.
The National Guard's expected in the U.S. state of California after it was hit by the deadliest and most destructive wildfire in state history. The blaze killed at least 48 people and razed the town of Paradise to the ground. The guards will look for and identify human remains. Now, the killer blaze was fueled by California's drought and strong winds.
A showdown is looming in the UK as Prime Minister Theresa May prepares to try to convince senior ministers to accept a draft European Union divorce deal that opponents say threatens the unity of the United Kingdom.
And time is not on her side. She has only until the 29th of March before the United Kingdom is out of the European Union. The British cabinet will meet in a few hours. In fact, they are meeting right now. You are looking at live pictures right now. Parliament, rather, I apologize. Parliament is meeting right now. You're looking at live pictures. Theresa May giving her talk there. And Natalie Powell, now she has some details that have been leaked. Let's listen in.
The key factors that are being leaked are over some of the major sticking points, that of course being the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland and what is going to happen there. According to these leaks, one of the things that has been agreed by the EU and by UK Prime Minister Theresa May is to set up an independent arbitration committee which would be responsible for judging if that backstop were to be put in place, when of course it can be terminated. So that is quite a significant step forward. Other leaks we've heard about, of course, are to do with reviewing the transition period. Now, we know that the transition period is expected to come to an end at the end of 2020. Well, a review is going to be put in place in July 2020, about 6 months before the transition period is to be ended, according to these leaks. So lots of new compromises being made according to these leaks, but of course they are just leaks at this stage. But if they are true, of course, it is likely to upset many hardline Brexiteers who don't want to be connected to the EU for any longer than is necessary. She will, though, need to sell this to her cabinet, and they will need to assess whether indeed they can get behind what she has agreed with the EU. Many people have been saying, particularly those hardline Brexiteers, that perhaps they won't resign at this stage, but when it comes to a vote in Parliament, that they will vote it down. If she is able to get this through her cabinet today, and they are able to agree on this withdrawal agreement today, then she will need to publish this 500-page report. But even then, it may well be voted down at this stage, which could therefore mean that Theresa May and indeed the government would have to go back to the drawing board. So lots of hoops that will need to be jumped through before we get any kind of firm idea on a Brexit agreement.
Still ahead on this extended edition of Primetime Asia, we'll get you up to speed with the ASEAN and Republic of Korea Summit that took place earlier today. Do stay with us.
Welcome back. Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong says South Korea has been a strong supporter for ASEAN-led projects, but there is room for more cooperation in the region. He made that comment in his opening address of the 20th ASEAN ROK Summit.
The ROK has also been a strong supporter of ASEAN-led mechanisms and ASEAN community-building efforts. But there's much more we can do. For example, we can upgrade the ASEAN ROK free trade area and establish an ASEAN-Korea air services agreement. This will reinforce business and people-to-people links between both sides and benefit both our peoples.
Meanwhile, South Korean President Moon Jae-in has outlined his new southward policy to strengthen relations with ASEAN. He further proposed to host an ASEAN ROK commemorative summit next year to celebrate 30 years of dialogue and relations between both sides.
Now in Singapore, Cybersecurity Agency's chief executive, he's laid out some recommendations for the healthcare sector. The island state was hit by its worst ever cyber attack earlier this year, and today was the last day of public hearings into the Sing Health cyber attack.
37 witnesses, including 5 experts, testified over 20 days of hearings. Lily Ying wraps it up.
Using the analogy of a car, the Cybersecurity Agency's chief executive David Koh said cybersecurity is like a car's brakes. The driver will only dare to go far if the brakes are good. Mr. Koh then gave suggestions on how the healthcare sector and IHIS can improve on their brakes. The first recommendation is to review the reporting structure of the cybersecurity departments in IHIS. They are currently embedded within a team responsible for providing IT solutions to the healthcare clusters. As such, cybersecurity may be overlooked in favour of service delivery objectives. The team should also have more direct access to key decision makers, so management can better manage risk accordingly. A second recommendation by Mr. Koh is to have more multi-layered security mechanisms around the medical records database. CSA's assessment was that the IT system had been designed with business efficiency in mind, but cybersecurity should have been a key feature and not slept on as an afterthought. To better protect sensitive patient data, he suggested that only a controlled group of people have the privilege to access the data. One way of doing so is to segment the database such that access to VVIP data is only limited to a select group, like their personal doctors. Closing submissions will be heard on 30th November.
Now, if you're just joining us, Singapore Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has kicked off the gala dinner of the 33rd ASEAN Summit this evening. It was held at the Suntec Convention Centre.
Now, in his speech, the Prime Minister said the groundwork has been laid for a more united, resilient and innovative ASEAN. Mr. Lee said the ASEAN spirit has been built up over the course of their meetings this year as he praised the commitment of all the member states.
Before the gala, Prime Minister Lee welcomed each world leader as they arrived. Guests tonight included Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau as well.
And this has been an extended coverage of Primetime Asia. As usual, you can find us at channelnewsasia.com as well as on Facebook and Twitter.
You'll be seeing more of us throughout the evening right here on Channel News Asia. Bye for now.